Let's go a little bit further with Bootstrap. We've seen some of the basic things that it can do. Already explored how we can use it to quickly style tables, how we can get responsive content by placing it inside of a container div, and a few other very useful things that Bootstrap does to just make it look pretty out of the box. Here now I'm moving on to another example. I've called this example 10. I pulled in the Bootstrap or the HTML min snippet. I changed the title. And then I also started to create the page itself. I just put in some titles for all of this. I did go ahead and put it right in a div class equals container. And then I did make sure the header had the page header class set on it. So all of this is already set up and ready to go. It's our basic Bootstrap kind of page. And here's what it looks like. It's not really doing anything of interest yet, but it's going to very quickly. You'll find, just like last time, that I've also included some example data. This is similar to, but not quite the same as the very first set of data. You'll find example 10-blocks, and these are set up where every single element is inside of a div tag with a little bit of formatting applied to it. And then you'll also find example 10-lists, and this is where all the data is inside of just an li element. I want to bring this one in, but before we do that, let's go ahead and come back to example 10 and prepare for that. I'm going to go inside of the section, the main section, and I'm going to give myself an unordered list, a UL. You guys should remember what that is. This is just a list of items that you want bulleted, but that you don't want counted in order in any way. Let's come back over here then and grab all of these LIs and just put them right in the middle of our UL. And just like that, we should have a nice list in the middle of our page with all kinds of data in it. And there it is. It's not the best formatted list. It's got some things that could be done a little bit better. Let's fix one thing really quick. Everywhere where I have a colon, or really when the phone number starts, I kind of like a space before that phone number. So let's do that. Let's say find in buffer, give it as much context as I can. So I just did, by the way, Command F to bring that up. So now it's got the B, and let's give it the open parentheses too. I'd like to replace this with the same thing, but with a space before the parentheses, and then I just hit replace all. And because I was really specific like that, it should have only replaced it in those places. I don't know if there was anything else that had a parentheses going on. I'm going to get rid of the find dialog just by hitting escape right there. And now when I do this, there we go. We've got a little more spacing in there. All the same, this is a pretty vanilla sort of list. Not a whole lot going on here. This does exactly what you'd expect HTML to do. It doesn't look very bootstrappy. It's very dense. Everything's kind of tight together. Does it do anything responsive? Well, it's as responsive as a container ever is, but once it starts to get low here, you see it starts to crunch it down, just like our table did before we surrounded it in that whole table responsive thing. So, what can Bootstrap do for us here? Well, Bootstrap has its own sort of way of handling lists. It calls them list groups. And they're kind of designed to be a drop-in to style existing lists. First, you start with the surrounding tag, in this case UL, and you give it the class list group. And this means that I'm about to define a whole bunch of things that belong inside of a group. That is a listing group, as the name kind of suggests, right? Then we need to go through each of these LIs and also give them a class. Now, this might seem a little tedious, but bear with me. We're going to say list group item. And how do I get that everywhere? Well, let me go ahead and just copy this little bit, and I'm going to do it just like I did a moment ago. Let's go ahead and say here LI. I'm going to find all the tags that match that, and I'm going to modify them to include the class list group item inside of it with only one space on there, just like that. And then I do replace all, boom. Very quickly get that class placed inside of all of those. You just have to hope that there aren't extra things on your page that were LIs, but they aren't for us because we just started this. So now they're all in there and I didn't have to type them myself. Now when we refresh this, things should change a lot after I save the file. There we go. Refresh, that's better. Now we have a much more bootstrappy kind of list. You'll notice now that things look very well spaced out. It is a nice sort of almost table-y looking list, which is what you'd want. You also get these nice rounded corners around the last item and around the very first item, which is also a very bootstrappy way of doing things. So generally here, we've gone from a plain sort of uninteresting list to something that's much more stylized in what we're doing here. Now we also have some options here. Let's go ahead and take a look at some other things that we can do. When we do list group item, you can put a dash after it, and then you'll see a few of these other options here. Let's just do the first few with each of these. List group item success, list group item info, list group item warning, and list group item danger. And if we apply those to the first 4, then they should look a little different. And they do. They look very different. This is another case here where, just like with the table, we need to make sure that we don't get rid of the base type list group item. So it should be list group item space list group item success. And then the same with info, warning, and danger. So we'll modify those slightly to look like that instead, and that should help us. There we go. What did this do? Well, it gave each one a sort of theme. This is the, let's see, what order did we go in? Success, info, warning, danger. So success is typically green. It's positive in some way, just like a green light means go. Info is neutral, and they've decided that blue is neutral in Bootstrap parlance, so it styles it to look blue. Warning is yellow, cautious, be slow. And then error, I believe is the last one, or excuse me, danger is the last one, is red, stop. So this is a pretty common sort of design language that we have here. And notice it picks some very soft, nice versions of these colors. It also changed the color of the text, so we have both a foreground color and a nicely complementing background color. Now, I will warn you that some of the colors that it's choosing here may not be colorblind friendly, so do be careful once you start using colors like this liberally. But that's something that I want you to make sure you're thinking about when you're working in a larger context for your particular company. Accessibility is always important. But for the purposes of this class, I'm not going to hold you to any sort of design standards like that. That's outside the scope of what we're teaching here. So, this is all pretty basic. It doesn't get to looking all that interesting. There should be one other thing that we can do here with all of this. Let me go ahead and revert back to what this was before we added in those specific types. There's one other thing we can do here. We can add active to one of these items. And if we do that, you'll see that that one gets pulled out and highlighted. And here it gets a deep blue background and a white foreground color on top of it. So this is something that you could use along with, say, a hover command, so that as you're going through this, it shows you when one's active. Or if we had this, and as we were clicking on things, it was bringing up more information, we could see that as well, and it would help us get a little more interesting results here. So this is a basic sort of list interface that we have here. They don't have quite the same styles with this that they did with the table, but they do still offer you some styling of individual bits and pieces. You will notice as you start to type in list group, these are really the only things that come up. So we don't have things like striped or hover available with this, but you'll find if you Google around on the internet, there are a lot of people that offer that kind of functionality. And of course you could switch to a table if you wanted to have that functionality. They'd just be tables with one column. Now here's something that I think is really interesting about Bootstrap. We're making a list of things, so it's pretty natural for us to go UL and LI here. But because this is Bootstrap, you don't have to. You can use any sort of natural parent-child tags that you think will do the job. So, in fact, this could be a div. Now, if we change it to a div, all of a sudden, we're breaking the rules. An LI can only be a child of a UL or an OL tag. So, we can't leave those as LIs. But we could change them to something else. Perhaps each of these items needs to do something when you click on it and needs to invite you to click on it. The easy way to use that sort of language is to not use an LI tag, but instead we could go through and use an A tag. So let's go ahead and put this in here. I want to find all these ones that look like this, and I want to modify them now to have an A. And every A tag, an anchor tag, needs to have an href. So we should say href equals something. Now, I don't have anything specific to link to yet. And so the common sort of placeholder when you don't have a link yet is just put a pound in there. And you guys should remember that allows you to create links that are internal to the current document when you use the hashtag or pound symbol. Let's go ahead and do a replace all from this. And there we go. Now we're getting a class list group item equals good, but we're not all the way done because we're still closing these with the wrong tag. So let's fix that as well. So every closing li tag I now want to be a closing anchor tag. So here /a. Replace all. Now this is going to feel a little bit strange. All of a sudden I have a list, but I'm using a div to define the limits of the list, and I'm using a tags for the internal content instead of li's. This works because everything's defined in the CSS class. It doesn't really care what element you put it on. It's going to take that element over and design it to look exactly the way you want. As long as the tag itself is something visual, it will take it over and turn it into a list group, or a list group item in this case. Let's go ahead and do this. So here, I don't have a UL or an OL, I don't have any LIs, but these things are all turning into that. The other thing that's cool now is as I go over it, look what it does. It's now doing exactly what it would do to things that were clickable. It turns into the little hand icon that says, please click me, and it takes on this little sort of stylized appearance as you hover over it. And then as I click on it, it would actually select it as being something that I activated there. I just clicked on that one. Click on a different one. It shows it as sort of selected for a moment. So it recognizes that you made these things clickable hot links, and it styles them accordingly. Now I can't think of other sorts of tags you might want to use for a list like this, but you certainly could if you wanted to. It's doing some things a little bit weird here. It's jumping up to the top when I click this, but by and large, these are the two key ways that you'll see demonstrated in other people's code, using it for these kinds of purposes. So this is a great way to start showing things that are within lists. But sometimes we don't just always want our lists to be top to bottom. This still actually behaves pretty well in a responsiveness kind of way. It does eventually get down pretty small, but it's gotta at some point. And it does start to keep the spacing between them nicely. Really, we have a whole nother, much more powerful tool at our disposal that we can be using for responsiveness that we haven't engaged yet. When we have a table, things are laid out in rows and columns, but they stay at those fixed width rows. And when we have a list like this, things are laid out only in rows. They don't ever move into a column orientation. To have something that's nice and flexible and able to do sort of both, we have to engage the grid system inside of Bootstrap. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and come in here and let's hide this section. So I'm going to say section hidden because I want to now do something a little bit different. And after I do that, you'll remember it just goes away now. It's out of the way. But I haven't gotten rid of the code, so you'd still be able to see the code here. And let's come down here and create a new section. And then we'll give it a little header here. And we're going to engage something called the Bootstrap grid. The point of the grid is to subdivide the screen into blocks that will neatly space themselves out, but will also reposition themselves as the size gets smaller. This is going to behave a lot like the sort of responsive thing we saw when we used the inline block display, but it's going to be way more sophisticated than that and much easier to work with. What we need to do here, first of all, is we need to tell it that we're giving it stuff that's in a grid. And this usually begins by saying class equals row. So a row means that I want you to lay out things in sort of a row-like structure. And then we just need to tell it how many columns each thing will take up. And it will then separate those into actual rows for us. So row itself is actually going to represent more than one row visually, but it is a group of stuff that, were we able to get the screen wide enough, would be one gigantic row if we wanted it to be. If you want to make sure things go on separate rows, you can use multiple rows. But most of the time, you're just wanting one big row, and it'll figure out how to break that into several rows. So we just have this one outer class equals row container. Within that, we need to define columns. I'm going to now come over to this other example chunk I gave you. This is the exact same data, but formatted differently. Namely, we've placed everything inside of a div tag, and we've put the stuff inside of that on multiple lines using a p tag and a forced line break in the middle of it. So I'm going to grab all of this information. Again, you should be able to get this from the website. And I want to bring that in here and put it inside of my row block. Now, if I go to render this as it is right now, I'm still not going to get good responsiveness. But let's at least, save this and let it do its thing. Let's come over here, load this up, and see what we get. And here you see it is showing us for each one of these a different div. And that div, of course, is block style. So it gives it some space above and below. It'll always show us the name, then the phone number, then the email in little blocks. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of CSS to make this a little more attractive. We can do that. And in order to do that, I'm going to need a new file. I'm going to make my own CSS here. So let's save this as example10.css. And let's create a class. We'll call this info block. And we'll give this a border. And that will be, we'll do 1px. Solid, and then my happy little 80-80-80 gray that I always like. And we'll give it a little bit of padding. And we'll say that the padding is 3px, nothing too intense. So that's our style of info block. Let's link that CSS into here. So I come below the Bootstrap CSS and I link in rel equals style sheet, and the href equals just example10.css. Because it's in the same folder, I don't have to do anything unusual. Now I want to come through this right here and make sure we add in that class to every single one of these divs. It's going to be a little bit trickier to do that, but let's go through it. Basically, I want to take anything that's a div that has h4 immediately after it, which should only be these. Let's see here. You can visually scan through and see what it's highlighting. Those are the things that match. It's definitely matching all of those. And it doesn't seem to be matching anything else. Good. So that's a way I can isolate just these divs. And what do I want to do? Well, I want to give them the class info block so that they get formatted the way I want. And then we can hit replace all. And there we go. We just added that class to all of those divs, which is a good thing. Now if I refresh, there are my info blocks. It looks a lot like the list groups that we made a moment ago, doesn't it? Just not as pretty. It doesn't have the rounded corners, and these are a little too thick in between each one. We should leave the complicated stuff to Bootstrap here, but we did at least get a border around it. That was the main thing I wanted. Now, what can we do with these? Well, let's go ahead and for our own purposes here, one thing that I'm going to want to do to make sure we can see all of this, in addition to padding, let's give it a margin of 5 pixels. And this will create some space between each block. If we refresh that, now you can see the separation between individual blocks. That'll be important. And the last thing that we really need to do is we need to now tell it how big are these. Now in the past, we went right to the CSS and we said width equals something, and then it would do its thing. And whenever that width was too big, it did it anyways. And very often we supplied those as percentages. Instead, we now want to go through here and use a special class that's provided by Bootstrap to tell it how big these are in the row. So we've told it we're inside a row. We now need to tell it how to treat these as if they were columns in that row. So let's go in the first one here and give it a special class. These are all going to start with COL and then dash, and then we need to give it one of 3 things: small, medium, or large. Now these are going to be important. Initially here I'm just going to pick medium so that we have something. But that's not where it stops. We then would put on another dash and we have some choices. We can say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down to 12. This is the column system, the grid system that Bootstrap provides. There are always 12 columns that are evenly spaced across the row. And you simply tell it how many of those 12 does this one thing take up. Let's say it takes up 3. If we say it takes up 3, and remembering there are 12, well, how many of these could we fit left to right? Pretty straightforward. We could fit 4 of them. Now I want to make sure and do this everywhere, that all of these blocks are labeled to take up 3 columns, and we'll talk about what the MD, the medium, means in a moment. So let's go find this. I want to search for class info block with the quote on both sides of it. And it looks like we've got that. And then I want to change it so that it now has CLL-MD-3 right after info block, making sure there's a space between the two so that it distinguishes them. We say replace all, boom, there, it's gone through and added that everywhere. Everywhere it was info block, it now says CLL-MD-3. Let's go see what this did. If we refresh, now here they are, all lined up across. So just to prove my point that there are exactly 12, I worked with this to make sure that it would space them out 4 per and use the full width of the page. Now what was going wrong before? Let's take a look at it real quick. You'll remember previously we had a single div here that had both info block and then col medium 3 both assigned to the same div. The problem is that we were adding margins with info block, and those margins were not being accounted for in the column setup. So what I did was added an extra div outside of the info block that would first apply the column settings, and then the inner div applies info block to this. Now that also required me to add an extra div close at the end of the line, and the line is now spilling over onto 2. But still, you can do all of this with just a little bit of clever working through find replace. So to pause here, take a little bit of a moment, try and get this to match. So that gets us nicely spaced out. There's 12 columns. It's putting 3 columns for each of these. Now what happens here? As I start to resize these, it's going to resize them in nice, neat columns. And then eventually, we hit a point where they just won't fit anymore. And now it puts them top to bottom rather than as a row. It just decides, okay, we don't have enough space anymore. Let's stop. So the first question is, well, how does it know it doesn't have enough space anymore? Well, it turns out we told it. We told it exactly at what point we wanted it to change. Now this is where I find the options in Bootstrap are a little bit limiting, but let me show you what it is that determines that. Basically, it's this MD in the middle. We can change it. Let's instead change it to CLL-SM-3. SM means small. So first I want to search for CLL-MD-3 and then replace it with SM-3. These are the only ones that are using this class, so this should work fine. It only found 50 and there are 50 names. We say replace all. And now it should have that set up the way we want. And if I come over here and refresh, I'm not going to see anything change. But now I've told it to change at the small level rather than the medium level. So as I bring this down, it's going to wait a little bit longer before it does it. And you can see here it actually starts to break a little bit before it finally then switches them top to bottom. Now you'll find the points at which these switch are very subtle. So let's take a look up here. Remember, I've got the responsive form of the DevTools open, and it does put these little lines up at the top that help me know exactly where it's changing over. I'm also going to change things here a little bit because I had it zoomed in, and I want to stop the zooming. So let's see here. Let's go view, zoom out. There we are. And let's get back to 100%. Make sure we're reset to exactly 100% so that it's not doing anything funky. And then let's see, make the GUI there a little bit bigger still, but still view. Let's see, zoom out. No, yeah, 100, that's where we want to be. Good. So let's see, we're in the small version right now. Where does it change? And we want to see where it changes to suddenly being top to bottom. There it is. It's this line right here when we move from a laptop to a tablet. Suddenly, they all become top to bottom. Now, let's go back again here and change these from small to the next one up, which is medium. That's the one we had before. Oop, I can't type here. So we're going to search for everything that's col-small-3 and change it to col-medium-3, MD. Replace all, save, and refresh. So I don't see anything different at first, but remember, previously as it went from laptop to tablet, that was where it changed. Let's see what it does now. It changes much sooner. It's not quite in line with the change from laptop L to laptop, but it is still pretty close to that. And so it changes to the top to bottom sooner. What else do we have? Well, we also have large, LG. So let's search for medium and replace it with large. Replace all. And let's see where that one occurs. Got to refresh. And now here, as we come down, even before we get to that first delineation. So the previous one, medium, was happening right about here. Now this one's happening way out here. So this is when they're really big, and if you don't have the full width, you want to immediately go to stuff that requires a single row per item. Now there are some other ones available. Sometimes you'll find people using extra large and extra small, XL and XS is how you do those. Those are actually extensions to Bootstrap. They don't work out of the box. You'll notice here, if we go in, let's just start typing here, call dash something. Small, medium, and large are really the only options. You'll see occasionally people use extra small, but it doesn't quite work the same as the other ones do. And I believe there's an extra large. Now that one doesn't even show up here. That requires an extension to even enable it. So let's go ahead and put in the extra small just so that you see how that behaves, because I think that one is one that actually works out of the box. We can say replace all, save that. And as you might expect, it's going to be much more generous about how long it lets these things stay in columns. And it's really going to start to mess up here. You see, we've already even hit the fluid point, and it's still got them in columns. And they stay in columns forever. They never go to being in a single column in that form. So rarely is that what you want to use. Here's one way to think about this. Really, that directive in the middle where you have call, size, and then a number, the one in the middle, the size, is just a hint to Bootstrap about how big the content is that's inside of the block. Ours is about medium size. It's not really all that big. So using MD is a great place to start. And you'll recognize, let's do a replace all, there we go. You'll recognize that if we use MD, it never really gets funky. It stays at medium size for quite a while. And it maybe goes down to that single column form a little sooner than we'd like. It's practically on tablet mode though, but it does it. The other option though, the next one down, is going to be small. Let's try that one. If we do that, then it'll stay in columns longer. But you'll notice here, in this version, things are getting kind of messed up. The problem is what used to be on one line is now on two, and so some of these blocks are taller than others, and that starts to mess things up. Also, some of the email addresses, do any of them do it here, are a little too long for the box. Here we go, this one gets to be a little too long. As I said before, these are all just randomly generated, so you never really know what you're going to get with these, but the size of them is pretty straightforward. Still, there are some that are a little too long. So here, when it makes the block taller, that screws up the whole placement of the row. It even sometimes does strange things like this. And when it's too long to even fit in the box, it spills out of it, which is a big problem. By saying medium instead of small, we avoid this, this issue. Now, there were other ways that we could deal with this to try and keep it from happening, but those are beyond anything that we want to get into right now. So as it is, you'll find that you don't have a whole lot of freedom about exactly where you want it to change between column mode and then single list mode. You'll just have to kind of go with what it gives you. So bear that in mind. Otherwise, this is the more sophisticated kind of grid system that we're allowed to work with when we're working inside of Bootstrap. And this is where the real power of having a full responsive system at our disposal starts to expose itself. When you are dealing with things that make the most sense to place in a grid, do it. Even if it's just 3 things side by side, put them in a row and put those 3 things in some sort of column sizing arrangement, and let Bootstrap take over. And then when you view it on a smaller device, it will arrange itself appropriately. We saw some of that happening on the main Bootstrap website, and this is exactly how they achieved it.